things. The storms of life are hard to deal with. We try to cope with disappointments, sickness, struggles, heartaches. Perhaps you've reached a point where you're ready to just give up. Maybe you've trained your children the best that you know how, and now they're slipping away to the world. Your son's become a bully. Isn't that something we see a lot today? Your daughter has gotten rather rebellious. Your parenthood seems to be on unstable sand. Where did you go wrong? Or you faithfully return your tithes and you love God, but yet you face bills that you cannot bear the money to pay. Suddenly you're facing financial disaster. What will happen? Your solid foundation seems to be made of shifting sand. Or you have a good marriage, but it seems lately that your wife has been family quiet. And you never dreamed that she would be having a prayer. And now the marriage is headed for the sandbar of the Lord. You thought you had the cancer beat,
Cody.
only to find out that it had metastasized. And all of a sudden, you have a much larger battle in front of you. The hardest fight of your life. If you're looking for answers for the problems you face, then we need to go to one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It's a story about foundation. But before we do, Psalms 11:3 says, "If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do?" We want to look at the text that was read this morning there in Matthew chapter 7. It's the conclusion of Christ's sermon. Look at this large print. I want to read these verses again. "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on a rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." I think I want to go ahead and read the last two verses too. "When Jesus had finished these words," verse 28, "the crowds were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority and not as their scribes." Here in the Bible, Jesus tells of two different house builders. Both houses got hit by the same storm at the same time. Both houses probably looked similar, and both of them lasted until the storm. Then the difference between them was quick to see. One stood fast while the other was reduced to a pile of rubble. Can you just see two men out on the beach? The man building on the sand, he makes quick work. His walls go up fast. The other man is sweating on the rocky ground just up from the beach, chiseling and chipping away to anchor his house onto the solid rock. Sandman, he finishes his house and he sits down in the shade on his front porch, drinking lemonade and watching his neighbor sweat it out on those hot rocks. You know, he may have even scoffed like they did in Noah's day when it took Noah 120 years to build the ark. How are you doing? Ain't you done yet? You know, can't you just hear it? Well, finally, both houses were finished. For several months or even years, they seemed to be equal. But testing storms always come. The rains came down and the floods came up, and the house on the sand crashed down. You may see two marriages. Both seem to be happy. But one couple does not pray together, and they don't read the Bible together. Jesus is not central to that family. And when the storm comes, that marriage fails so quick. Both seem to be happy. If you're shopping for a life partner, build your house on the only foundation that will last, Jesus Christ. Wise men build on the rock. You know that rock is Jesus. Life out there on the beach might be more fun, but it's not going to last. Have you ever watched the middle of South Area? They'll usually dig a large hole 3 or 4 stories deep. And then they will drive steel beams down until they hit solid bedrock. And it takes weeks, sometimes even months, to set that foundation. The longer that you want your building to last and the higher you want it to go, the greater the foundation has to be. Since we plan to build all the way up to heaven, we must build a deep foundation on Jesus Christ. Question here, why did the Sandman build what he did? It was the easy way. For him to avoid work. It's quicker. You know, some still build on the sand. A student may say, I'm going to drop out of school and get a job and get married. However, just think how much better off they would be if they could stick to the foundation work. Education is the foundation of success in employment. Take time to graduate, either from a college or a technical school. Take time. Learn a career. Learn. Make good grades. You know, to skimp on study is like limiting the concrete in the pudding.
I'm kind of reminded there of the first time I went to college. 1979, 1980. Dropped out at the end of the year. Went back to college in 2010. Finally, got a little smarts, so to speak. And in 2010, when I went back to school, somebody asked me, well, what's your schedule like? I said, well, I get up at 5:30 in the morning and eat breakfast. By 6 o'clock, I've got a book open. Except for stopping to eat or to go to a class, I didn't close the book until 10 o'clock at night. That was my schedule, 6 days a week. But the one that builds on sand doesn't do that. Had I done that in 1979, 1980, well, things would have probably been a little different. I'd have probably been an engineer today instead of, anyway. The Sandman was short-sighted. In every decision, there is a short view and a long view. Happy is the person who never barters future good for present pleasure. The foolish person's always in a hurry. Commitment is not on their agenda. He has little time to dig deep into the Word of God to find truth. He loves spiritual highs, but cares little about spiritual depths. Too little feeding on Jesus causes weak faith and a baseless hope. You know, it would be well for each of us to spend a thoughtful hour each day meditating on the life of Jesus. An hour is not too much. Actually, it's still too little, but spend time laying a solid foundation of good prayer habits and Bible study. Now, what about the sand? It's the opposite of the rock. You know, we know the rock is Jesus. To build on the rock is to build on Jesus. To build on the sand is to build on self. Sand represents self-will, self-sufficiency, and self-righteousness. The wise man is anyone who hears and does God's will. Back to 7:24. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them